The sun rose over Earth on what seemed like any other day, but it would soon become the dawn of a nightmare that humanity could never have imagined. Without warning, the Xarathians descended upon the planet. Their massive warships darkened the sky, blotting out the sun itself. The invaders were swift and merciless. With weapons that could melt cities in seconds, entire metropolises were reduced to smoldering ruins as Earth's defenses crumbled under their might. The world's military forces attempted to fight back, but nothing prepared them for the sheer power and precision of the Xarathians. Their ships moved with an eerie grace, and their weapons fired with perfect accuracy, overwhelming any resistance that dared rise against them. In the chaos of the attack, amidst falling debris and desperate cries of the people, a handful of the planet's leaders and civilians managed to escape the devastation. They fled into space aboard a covered transport vessel, barely surviving the wreckage of their once great home. They knew they could not return, but the fire of defiance still burned within them. Scattered but alive, they made their way to a remote and secret base, known only to a few on the edge of human territory. Their plan was simple and yet audacious: to form the foundation of a resistance, a movement that would rise from the ashes of Earth's fall. The resistance was born out of necessity. As human survivors gathered at the base, they quickly realized that alone they were nothing against the might of the Xarathian Empire. It was then that the first signs of hope arrived in the form of alien emissaries who had watched the conflict from the shadows. The Lyrians, a race known for their wisdom and unparalleled intelligence, came first. They had suffered under Xarathian rule for centuries, and though they were a peaceful people, they knew the time for diplomacy had passed. They offered the humans their knowledge of warfare and strategy. Their sharp minds and calm resolve would prove invaluable in the days to come. Soon after the Tvek arrived, their appearance striking with their tall, slender forms and glimmering technology. They were once enslaved by the Xarathians, but had broken free through their own sheer willpower. The Tvek were known for their advanced weapons technology and their unrivaled engineering capabilities. The humans saw in them the key to turning the tide of the war. The alliance was fragile at first, but as they shared their stories and resources, they realized that only by combining their strengths could they hope to challenge the mighty empire that threatened to destroy them all. Captain Lyra Vale, a decorated officer in the human military, found herself at the forefront of this new resistance. She had seen Earth fall. She had watched as her comrades and friends were lost in the chaos of the initial invasion, but she refused to let their deaths be in vain. She was determined to forge a new future, a future where humanity would not be a footnote in the history of the stars, but a force that could challenge the greatest empires of the galaxy. She led her forces with both determination and compassion, rallying the diverse species of the coalition to fight not for survival alone, but for something greater, for freedom, for unity, and for the possibility of victory. As the first seeds of resistance began to take root across the galaxy, the threat of the Xarathians still loomed large, but the humans and their allies knew one thing above all else: they would not be cowed, they would not be slaves. They would fight to the last breath for their world and for the stars themselves. In the aftermath of Earth's fall, the resistance was struggling to find its footing. The human survivors knew they were outmatched in every way, but desperation and determination fueled their resolve. They had no choice but to find allies and strength beyond their borders. Earth was no longer the heart of humanity's fight, but the spirit of resistance burned brightly within them. The galaxy was vast and filled with countless alien species, some of whom had been crushed by the Xarathian Empire for centuries, and now they saw humanity's defiance as the spark of hope they had long waited for. The first of these allies were the Lyrians, a race of beings known for their towering intellect and subtle strength. Their once thriving empire had been reduced to a scattered collection of colonies under the harsh rule of the Xarathians. The Lyrians were a peaceful people who valued knowledge above all else, but the Xarathians had seen their brilliance as a threat and had suppressed them at every turn. The Lyrians knew that the only way to regain their freedom was to join the fight, and so they reached out to the humans, offering their knowledge of tactics and strategy. Their ships were sleek and fast, their minds sharp enough to decipher the enemy's plans before they even unfolded. They offered humanity a weapon they had long kept hidden, the key to understanding their foes' weaknesses. Soon after the Lyrians made contact, the Tvek followed. These beings were far more enigmatic with their elongated forms and silvery blue skin. They were an advanced species whose technology was centuries ahead of anything the humans had ever seen. The Tvek had been slaves to the Exarathians for millennia, but had broken free through sheer force of will and sheer force of invention. Their scientists had developed advanced weapons that could turn the tide of battle, but they had never had the opportunity to use them against the Exarathian forces. Until now, when they heard of humanity's resistance, they knew they had found kindred spirits. Their weapons, their technology would prove invaluable, and the humans would learn how to use it to strike back. Despite their strengths, both the Lyrians and the Tvek were reluctant to ally with the humans at first. There was a deep-seated mistrust between the species. The humans were newcomers in the fight, and many of the aliens questioned their resolve and their ability to stand against an empire as formidable as the Exarathians. But Captain Lyra Vale was determined to convince them. She was a beacon of strength and leadership in a galaxy filled with uncertainty. With careful diplomacy and a promise of shared victory, she slowly earned their respect. She understood that trust would not come easily, and that the fight for freedom would require more than just technology and strategy. It would require unity and a deep connection between the people of different worlds. Lyra's personal struggles mirrored those of the Alliance. She had lost her home, her comrades, and her family, but in the shared cause of freedom, she found a new sense of purpose. The Lyrians taught her the art of diplomacy and patience, while the Tvek pushed her to think beyond conventional tactics and into the realm of innovation and creativity. The human forces were small, but with the alliance of these great races, they began to grow stronger together. As they united under a common cause, the first coordinated strike took place. The Resistance launched a surprise attack on Exarathian supply depot deep in enemy-controlled space. The Lyrians provided the intelligence, the Tvek provided the weapons, and the humans led the charge in a series of carefully planned skirmishes. Their success was swift and decisive. It sent shockwaves through the Exarathian Empire. They had underestimated humanity's willingness to fight back. But this victory was only the beginning. It proved that the Resistance was not just a fleeting hope, but a rising force that would soon change the tide of war forever. The small but determined Resistance had just tasted their first victory, and it was a victory that would change everything across the galaxy. Whispers of their success spread like wildfire among the oppressed worlds. The spark of rebellion was ignited, and planets that had once bowed to Exarathian rule now saw a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Human ingenuity and alien technology combined in a way that no one had expected, and it was working. The Exarathians had long believed themselves invincible, but the Resistance had proven that even the mightiest of empires could be challenged. Captain Lyra Vale stood at the helm of the latest operation, a daring raid on Exarathian weapons factory on the edge of the sector. The factory was vital to the Exarathian war machine, producing the weapons that had crushed human and alien resistance across countless systems. The attack would be risky, with only a small fleet of ships and a handful of soldiers ready to launch an assault on an enemy stronghold heavily fortified and well protected by a fleet of Exarathian warships. But Lyra had no doubts. She knew the risks, and she knew the stakes. This was their chance to deal a blow to the heart of the enemy's power. The operation was swift and precise. The Lyrian intelligence had mapped the factory's defenses, and the Tvek had designed new weaponry capable of breaching the hardest armor. The humans led the charge with their new allies close behind. Their ships flew in low and fast, avoiding detection. As they approached the factory's perimeter, a series of synchronized strikes disabled the outer defenses, and the soldiers stormed the facility with a mix of explosives and hand-to-hand combat. The Exarathians were caught off guard, their soldiers unprepared for the ferocity of the Resistance's assault. Inside the factory, Lyra led her team through a maze of corridors and labs where weapons of unimaginable destruction were created. The sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the halls. But there was no turning back now. They had to finish the mission, no matter the cost. The factory's central core was their target, a complex system that powered the entire operation. Lyra and her team fought their way to the heart of the facility, where they encountered fierce resistance from the Exarathian guards. The battle was intense, But humanity's resolve was stronger. Each soldier fought as though their life depended on it, because it did. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the core. Lyra planted the explosives with a swift and steady hand, and the countdown began. The mission had been a success. The weapons factory was destroyed. But as the team made their way to the extraction point, disaster struck. The Xarathians had already deployed reinforcements, and their ships descended from the sky like a swarm of locusts. The resistance had no choice but to fight their way out against overwhelming odds. In the chaos of the retreat, Lyra found herself separated from her team and forced to make a desperate run for the extraction zone. As she sprinted through the ruins of the factory, the distant hum of enemy ships grew louder and louder. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Every step was a gamble, but she pushed forward, determined to make it out alive. Just as she thought all hope was lost, a small shuttle appeared above her, and the sound of its engines filled the air with a rush of relief. The shuttle's hatch opened, and Lyra dove inside, just as the weapons factory erupted in a massive explosion behind her, sending a shockwave that sent their ship tumbling through the sky. The victory was bittersweet. They had accomplished their goal, but at a heavy cost. The human resistance had made its mark on the Xarathian Empire, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The destruction of the Xarathian weapons factory was a victory that echoed throughout the galaxy, but it was also a reminder of the high price of war. The Resistance's success was marred by the lives lost during their daring raid. Many brave fighters never made it out of the burning wreckage of the factory. Their sacrifice fueled the rage and determination of those left behind. And soon the galaxy saw a new wave of attacks as the human-led resistance became a symbol of defiance against the seemingly invincible Xarathian Empire. Captain Lyra Vale, though shaken by the loss, knew that they could not stop now. Their victory had done more than cripple the Xarathian supply lines. It had reignited the flames of rebellion across occupied worlds, and the first stirrings of revolt were beginning to sweep through the galaxy. Planets that had lived in fear for so long were finally rising up against their oppressors, and they looked to the human resistance as a beacon of hope. The time had come to strike back. The resistance began launching more coordinated attacks on Xarathian strongholds with a renewed sense of purpose. Each mission became more daring and each victory more significant. They struck against military outposts, supply convoys, and communications hubs, all vital parts of the Xarathian war effort. Each blow they landed caused the Empire to stagger, but as their success grew, so did the Xarathians' fury. The Xarathian response was brutal. The Empire had never shown mercy, but now, with their grip on the galaxy slipping, they escalated their retaliation. They targeted human colonies, tearing through them with ferocity unseen before. Entire cities were wiped off the map, and millions of innocent civilians were slaughtered without hesitation. The Xarathians aimed to break the Resistance's spirit by erasing humanity's hope from existence. They believed that if they could destroy the people who dared to defy them, they would extinguish the fire of rebellion once and for all. The massacre of the colony world of Valter was a turning point for the Resistance. It was a peaceful world with no military presence, a place where families lived in harmony, unaware of the war raging across the stars. But when the Xarathians arrived, they showed no mercy. The invasion was swift and brutal, and within hours the planet was ablaze, its cities reduced to rubble. The death toll was staggering. The once thriving world now a graveyard. When Lyra learned of the devastation, something inside her snapped. The loss of life was not just a tragedy. It was a call to arms. The Xarathians had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back now. She rallied the surviving forces of the Resistance, and with the help of the Lyrians and Fek, they began planning a new offensive, not just to strike at the Xarathians, but to bring the fight to their doorstep. The Resistance had learned from their earlier successes and failures. The time for small, isolated skirmishes had passed now. They would take the war to the heart of the Xarathian Empire. They would hit them where it hurt most, on the worlds they had held under their oppressive rule for so long. The preparations were intense as they gathered forces from every corner of the galaxy. The Lyrians shared their knowledge of Xarathian tactics, and the TFEC provided advanced weaponry that would give the Resistance the firepower it needed to stand toe-to-toe with the Empire's might. The humans, with their passion and determination, served as the beating heart of this united front. With every passing day, the Resistance grew bolder as they orchestrated a series of strikes on critical Xarathian infrastructure, all while quietly infiltrating their strongest defenses in preparation for a decisive battle against the Empire's military heart. It would be a battle that would push the Resistance to their absolute limits. But Lyra was unshaken. The death of countless innocents weighed heavily on her, but it only fueled her resolve. The time for revenge had come, and this fire would burn brighter than ever before. The victory over the weapons factory had proven to the galaxy that humanity was more than just a fleeting threat. It had become a symbol of hope to those who had long lived under the shadow of the Xarathian Empire. As the Resistance grew in strength, more and more planets and species joined the fight against the oppressors. The time had come to strike at the heart of the enemy's power. The Resistance was no longer simply defending themselves or conducting small raids. They were preparing for something much greater: the Great Siege. The plan was ambitious: a full-scale assault on the Xarathian capital planet Karos, home to the heart of their military command, and the place where the Empire's most powerful leaders resided. The city itself was a fortress. Its defenses were legendary, and its orbital ring was surrounded by fleets of battlecruisers and interceptor drones designed to annihilate any who dared approach. But the Resistance was united in purpose. The Lyrians had provided the intelligence, the TFEC had supplied their most advanced weapons, and the humans had led the charge on countless smaller skirmishes. Now it was time for all their forces to combine in a final push that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. For weeks, the Resistance had prepared, assembling a fleet of ships from all corners of the galaxy. The Lyrians had re-engineered their stealth technology to bypass the Xarathian radar, while the TFEC adapted their cutting-edge energy weapons to penetrate the capital's defenses. The humans contributed their unyielding spirit, their familiarity with guerrilla tactics, and a fierce determination to never back down from the fight. Captain Lyra Vale had grown into a symbol of leadership. She was no longer just a soldier, she was the embodiment of the Resistance's heart and soul. She stood before the massive war council, made up of the finest minds from every species in the Alliance, her voice steady and unwavering. As she outlined the final strategy, they would strike in 3 waves. The first would be a decoy, designed to pull the Xarathians' focus away from the real attack. The second would consist of a diversion to disable their outer defenses, while the third would be the main assault, an all-out push to breach the planet's atmosphere and reach the central command structure, where the Xarathian leaders awaited their doom. It was a bold plan, one that carried with it the weight of countless lives, but it was their best chance, their only chance to win the war and secure a future free from the Xarathian yoke. As the fleet launched from the hidden base and entered the vast expanse of space, the Resistance knew they were embarking on a journey that would be remembered for generations. The path to Karos was fraught with danger. Their ships were pursued by Xarathian patrols, but the Alliance's unity and clever tactics allowed them to slip through undetected. The tension grew with each passing day. As they neared their target, the final battle was about to begin. Finally, after a tense silence, the Resistance fleet arrived at the outskirts of Karos. The planet loomed large before them, a beautiful and terrifying sight. The first wave of ships deployed their decoy tactics and began drawing fire from the enemy ships. As planned, the Xarathians took the bait and engaged their forces in a futile attempt to thwart the incoming assault. But the Resistance was not there for a drawn-out fight. They were here for something much more important. In a heartbeat, the second wave launched their attack, striking swiftly at the planet's outer defenses. Powerful energy weapons collided with shields and anti-aircraft turrets, fell as the Resistance ships created a clear path for the third and final wave to begin. With the decoy in place and the outer defenses weakened, it was time for Lyra and her team to lead the charge. The human fleet moved forward with determination, their hearts filled with the hope of a galaxy waiting to be freed. And though they faced unimaginable odds, they did not falter. They had come too far to turn back now. The battle for Karos raged on as the final wave of the Resistance fleet surged toward the planet's atmosphere. The first few strikes were successful, the outer defenses crumbled, and the planet's orbital shield flickered as powerful energy blasts tore through the Exarathian ships. But as the resistance forces pushed deeper into the heart of the capital, their triumph was short-lived. Their victory was marred by something far darker than the Exarathian warships closing in upon them. Deep within the heart of the resistance fleet, an insidious betrayal had taken root, and it was about to tear everything apart. Captain Lyra Vale stood on the bridge of the lead ship, her eyes scanning the chaos unfolding outside the massive viewport. She watched as the Lyrian stealth ships slipped through the gaps in the Exarathian defenses. The thick energy weapons delivered devastating blows to key military structures across the planet, and humanity's fighters engaged in fierce dogfights above the capital city. But something felt wrong. There was a shift in the air, a feeling of dread that clung to the resistance like a shadow. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt it deep in her bones. Her instincts were proven right when an alarm blared across the bridge. The systems flickered briefly, and then the ship's navigation controls locked into place. Something was overriding the ship's command structure. Lyra's hand flew to the console as she tried to regain control, but the screens went dark, and the comms link crackled to life. "We've been compromised." A familiar voice growled over the speaker. It was Commander Ilian, the second in command of the resistance forces. His voice was strained, and his words heavy with regret. "Lyra, I never wanted this, but I had no choice." Lyra's heart froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Ilian, what are you talking about?" she demanded, voice sharp with confusion and anger. "What have you done?" The Exarathians knew this would happen. Ilian's voice trembled through the comms. "They planted me here from the beginning to undermine your resistance, to destroy everything you've built. But I didn't know what it would cost when I agreed to help them. I thought I could keep control, but it's too late now. They've taken over the fleet's command systems. We're locked into their control." The realization hit Lyra like a punch to the gut. Ilian had been a double agent all along, feeding the Exarathians critical intelligence about the Resistance's movements, sabotaging their efforts from the inside. With every step, he had gained their trust, just to bring them to the edge of destruction. She had trusted him with her life and the lives of her people. "You'll never get away with this." Lyra hissed the words through clenched teeth. She turned to her crew and shouted, "We need to override their control now." But before she could issue another command, a massive explosion rocked the ship, sending it into chaos. Crew members scrambled to hold onto their stations as the ship shook violently. Outside the window, Lyra could see the Exarathian ships descending upon them like a swarm of predatory birds. The resistance fleet was already in disarray, caught in the trap Ilian had set for them. One ship after another was picked off by enemy fire. Lyra's mind raced as the betrayal set in. She was forced to make a choice in an instant, to abandon the fleet or risk losing everything. But Lyra was no coward, and she would never leave her people to die, not when they had come this far, not when they had fought for everything they believed in. She turned to her crew again, her voice filled with steely determination. "We fight back. We don't surrender. We've come too far to fall now." With a quick signal, the remaining resistance ships adjusted their formation and prepared to make a final stand. The betrayal might have left them weakened, but it hadn't broken their resolve. As the battle intensified, Lyra's eyes burned with both fury and the spark of something more, a new determination. She would never let the enemy destroy the spirit of resistance she had fought to ignite. And if she had to face her traitor with her own hands, so be it. She would make sure Ilian's betrayal did not go unpunished. The battle over Karos had escalated into chaos. The Resistance's forces scattered and vulnerable to the crushing might of the Exarathian fleet. Captain Lyra Vale's heart raced as she watched the once proud ships of the Alliance fall one by one, torn apart by the coordinated assault of the enemy. The treachery of Commander Ilian had put them in this position, but Lyra knew there was no time for regret. She had seen her people endure far worse, and this moment would not break them, not if she could help it. "We're not done yet," Lyra shouted to her crew, her voice cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade. She turned to the tactical officer, her mind working with lightning speed. "Patch into the remaining fleet. We're going to hit them from the inside. Take out their command systems." The officer nodded, quickly relaying orders across the remaining resistance ships. Despite the odds, there was still a glimmer of hope. The Xarathians were powerful, but they had not expected humanity to fight like this. They had underestimated the human spirit, the raw determination to survive no matter the cost. That spirit had bound the resistance together, and it would be that same fire that would keep them going, no matter the odds. But the price of such resolve was steep, and as the enemy ships descended upon them, Lyra knew there would be casualties. She felt the weight of every loss, every life that would be sacrificed for the chance of victory. It was the burden of leadership, the cost of loyalty. She could not afford to let doubt or fear cloud her judgment. Not now when everything was on the line. As the resistance fleet regrouped, Lyra's eyes fell upon the battle-scarred battlefield. In the distance, she saw the capital city of Kairos, still standing defiantly in the face of the storm. She could feel the pulse of the fight. The fate of her people, and of countless others, hung in the balance. She had to push forward, no matter the cost. But then, just as she prepared to make the next move, a new signal came through her ship's communications, a familiar, painful voice crackling through the comms. "Lyra, it's over." Ilian's voice was heavy with guilt. "I never wanted this, but they've taken control of me. I never thought I'd betray you. You have to understand." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, her mind struggling to process his words. Betrayal was a bitter poison, one that had seeped into every corner of their fight. She had trusted him as her second-in-command, as a friend. And now, in his words, she heard only weakness and regret. "I trusted you, Ilian," she said coldly, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and sorrow. "But trust isn't something you can just take back." The silence that followed hung heavy in the air. Lyra knew that, deep down, there would be no easy forgiveness. Ilian had made his choice, and it had cost them everything. But there was no time for mercy, not now. "I don't need your apology," Lyra said, cutting him off. "The resistance needs to focus on survival. If you have any honor left, you'll fight with us, not against us." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Lyra wondered if Ilian had already betrayed them completely. But then his voice returned, quieter, more resigned. "I will do what I can," he said before the comms went silent. Lyra turned back to her crew, her gaze hardening. The resistance would carry on, with or without Ilian. But she couldn't deny the sharp pain in her chest, the weight of the betrayal that had fractured the bonds they had built. Still, the war was far from over. It was not just about winning. It was about honor, about fighting for a future where humanity could stand on its own again. As the final assault on Kairos continued, Lyra stood firm at the helm. The resistance was battered, bruised, but they were not broken. No matter how many battles they fought, no matter the losses they endured, they would never stop fighting. She would see this war to its end, because the cost of failure was too great. And in that moment, as the enemy forces closed in, Lyra made a silent vow. For every life lost, for every sacrifice made, she would ensure that the legacy of their fight would never be forgotten. They would win, not for themselves, but for those who came after them, for the future that still hung in the balance. The skies over Kairos burned with the flames of war as the battle raged on. The resistance had no illusions left. Victory was not assured. Every second counted. With the Xarathian forces bearing down from all directions, Captain Lyra Vale refused to accept defeat. Her people, the allies who had come to fight beside humanity, all depended on this final push. She could feel the weight of every decision on her shoulders, the burden of every life lost, but she would not waver. Not now. Inside her command ship, the crew worked in a frenzied rhythm, the clattering of keyboards and urgent orders mixing with the deep pounding thrum of battle. Outside the viewport, the Xarathian fleet seemed endless, but Lyra wasn't deterred. She had always believed that it wasn't numbers that determined the outcome of a battle. It was heart, will, and courage. Humanity had shown it time and time again. Today would be no different. Status report. Lyra snapped, her eyes never leaving the chaotic field of battle. The Resistance fleet was battered, but not broken. There was still a flicker of hope, and Lyra would make sure it was enough. Enemy defenses are weakening, her tactical officer replied. We've breached the command tower's shield. But he hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. We're facing a massive counterstrike. They're deploying reinforcements. Lyra's jaw clenched. We don't have much time then. Prepare the final strike. It was now or never. The plan was set. With the outer defense shield nearly disabled, a small strike team would slip through the gap and infiltrate the heart of the Xarathian command center. There, they would place explosives in the core systems, bringing down the entire operation from the inside. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only way. Lyra's heart pounded as the team boarded the shuttle. Her trusted officers, Alien, despite his betrayal, now fully redeemed in this desperate hour, would lead the mission. But even if they succeeded, there was no guarantee they'd make it out alive. And yet, in the face of certain death, the crew's resolve never faltered. This was their moment, their sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Lyra knew it. She could see it in their eyes as they prepared to leave. These were people who had endured the worst, fought back against impossible odds, and now they would give their all for the future. Stay safe, Lyra said softly to Elian as he stepped into the shuttle. Elian, his face hardened by the guilt of his past actions, gave a grim nod. For the future, Lyra. For all of us. As the shuttle darted toward the planet's surface, Lyra held her breath. She watched as the small craft disappeared into the planetary atmosphere, knowing that the next few minutes could change everything. There was no turning back. Minutes stretched into eternity. On the bridge, Lyra and her crew could only wait, their fingers poised over their consoles. And then, it came. A series of blinding flashes lit up the sky as the first wave of explosions erupted in the heart of Kairos. The command tower trembled, and for a brief moment, all the fleet's systems went dark. Silence blanketed the battlefield. And then the lights came back on. The Xarathian ships were losing control. The capital city began to collapse under the weight of its own defenses. Victory was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality. Lyra stood at the helm, her hands shaking but her heart fierce. She could hardly believe it, but they had done it. The heart of the Empire had fallen, and with it the rest of the Xarathian forces would crumble. Their reign of terror would come to an end. But the cost was great. Many had died. The price of this victory was more than Lyra cared to count. And yet in that moment, looking out at the devastated capital of Kairos, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity had carved its place in the stars. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but the war had been won. The Empire would fall, and from the ashes, a new era would rise. A new dawn. Lyra turned to her crew. "We've won," she said, her voice steady. "This is just the beginning. We rebuild, and we make sure no one ever forgets what it cost to get here." And with that, the Resistance began to rebuild, not just for themselves, but for every world that longed for freedom. The fires of rebellion had burned bright, and now, those flames would light the way for a future of peace and hope. The universe had learned a lesson that day. Never underestimate humanity. It was a lesson the Xarathian Empire would never forget.